Namaste. Welcome to X Communities. This is episode 6. And once again, we've got quite a lofty agenda in front of us that I've come up with. I don't know if I'm going to get through everything, but I'm going to try because I want to keep this moving and I want to keep the story unfolding. And so here's the agenda right here. And just a couple of reminders, you should listen to this at 1.25 speed is the speed that I like to listen to my voice at, because it speeds it up and it just makes it more comfortable. Because as I'm recording this, I like to speak a little more slowly so that I can choose my words carefully and be measured and be thinking about what I have to say next. It just comes off a little bit better if I can take my time. And the second thing is that the name of these videos is X Communities, and the idea really is that you're doing this with a friend or two, or you're doing this with a small group of people. You're listening to these, and then my hope would be is that as a community or as a small group, you would just have discussion around the text that I'm actually commenting on. So I am providing a lot of commentary on different symbols, different characters in these stories that a lot of us are familiar with. And my hope is that you would take the time to unpack these and go a little bit deeper with them on your own. And I really believe that I can trust stories and I can trust legends and myths and science and historical characters, all of this. I can trust that these things have the ability to stand on their own. You don't necessarily need to have my commentary, but I do hope that by adding some commentary to these different ideas, it will either bring the story alive or it'll help the story be more relevant in 2025. And today in particular, a lot of the topics that we're going to be covering are going to be very applicable to 2025. And not only do we need more communities, but I believe that we need to be focused and we need to have a starting point to rebuild ourselves personally and in community in terms of our spirituality and in terms of our understanding of spirituality. Because I don't know about you, but for me, this world feels like the biggest clusterfuck that I've ever experienced in 58 years of living. It just seems like it's chaotic. It seems like people are being hurt. People are being excluded. It seems that we're living more and more of our lives online and sharing less and less of our lives, actually sharing space with individuals. And so I feel that these storylines are incredibly pertinent and very valuable. And I'm hoping that people will consent, not necessarily to these videos, but I'm hoping that you will consent to this process of just being open and willing to process these stories, these ideas, and to figure things out, take some time to meditate, to pray, to reflect on, all of those things. So here we are going to dive in, and we start with this character, King Herod. And King Herod, it's very interesting that we're going to start with a king, because I believe tomorrow or Saturday, I believe there's a No Kings protest that is going on. And so we have a lot of people who are basically comparing our president to a king, or in some people to a tyrant. And I've even heard terms, I'm not saying I agree with this, but I've even had terms of, a Nazi or and I don't know about that. And here's the thing, once again, in the end, it really doesn't matter, because at some point the baby that we are looking at is going to grow up, and we are going to have to engage and consider his teachings and how he played his life out, things like that. And I'm talking about Jesus, of course. But keep in mind that these stories are unpacking a whole bunch of different aspects. Now, one thing that I want to put out there before I get into the agenda is, well, actually, we can start right now, because you'll notice after our first points. Let me zoom into this. You'll notice in verse 1, so this is chapter 2, verse 1. I just realized I should probably put chapter 2 on here somewhere, but verse 1, it says King Herod, and I have this word, and the word is Kshatriyas. And if you go down a little bit to point Well, it's the one that starts with a 4. You'll notice there's another word called Brahman. And these are going to be really important concepts that I'm going to unpack a little bit. So I'm going to go back to me, and I want to show you a picture because I want to set up a format which I think is going to be really important as we unpack all of these different concepts, to have this structure in place that I'm going to keep referring to. I want you to look at this. Check this out. So this is an image that I found in several different places. This image is all around the internet. Now this one had some labels added to it by it looks like the BBC added some labels to it. And I want you to notice something. You have 5 different levels. So this is the Hindu caste system. So remember, I am here to bring so much stuff together to show you that so many of these concepts and some of these teachings have been around since the beginning of time. And if you go back to episode 2, I will also continue to suggest that at least the Christ or Brahman, the energy, that which has incarnated everything, has been around before there was even matter and energy. And we're calling that X. And so this stuff has been around. And so these videos are not about converting you to Christianity. These videos are not about wanting you to go into a certain religious practice. That's not what this is about. These videos are about looking at common themes and common patterns that have been in existence since the Big Bang, or since creation, or however you believe all of this mess started. Okay, so these things have been in existence. And so this model here, this model of the caste system, now as a disclaimer, the caste system has some pretty negative connotations to it, and rightfully so, because some people will take a model like this and they will make it a rule instead of a symbolic understanding of perhaps how societies are structured. And so this model has been incredibly abused in a few different ways that I'm just going to touch on really quickly. One way that this model has been abused is that as much as it makes sense with the way society functions as a unit, which is why it's a statue of a person sitting, this represents a society, there have been certain teachings that have come along with this, such as you cannot go outside of your caste system, that there is no upward mobility. There is no way, if you are a outcast or an untouchable, which is what it was originally referred to, or in this case, you look at the bottom, it's the Dalitas, or the Dalits, the outcasts, the street sweepers, the latrine, the toilet cleaners. It is assumed by a lot of people who still hold to this model as being the truth instead of just a model, that you cannot get out of your caste system. And we know better than that. We know that that is really not the case. We know that perhaps typically that's the way it works in society, so we can acknowledge that typically this is the way it might work and it might lay out, and we can get truth in pieces through this model, but we want to be really careful that the model is not being taken so literally and so just lacking any type of plasticity or being not even malleable in any way, that we can actually shape it and form it, to make it more useful. So anyway, but please consider this one. So let me zoom in on this. So I want you to consider a few things. I want you to notice the head. So the head is the Brahman part. The head is the Brahman part. And you'll notice it's been labeled with priests and teachers. So anything there, I'm going to add things like philosophers. I'm going to add things like storytellers, priests, teachers, religious leaders, spiritual leaders, mystics, professors. I don't know, I can keep going. But the idea is in this model of society, the head is the part that is actually working the rest of the body, which we know from neuroscience, it's the brain doing this stuff. And yes, there's a lot to be said about the heart and the gut, and I'll bring those things in as well. But it really is, neurologically, it's the brain that is supposed to be controlling everything else. And so we have priests and teachers. You'll notice that that is the head of this particular model. And in a healthy society, these are going to be the individuals who are at the top or at the head of the model. I shouldn't have said top, because it's not an issue of having more value. It's just that the role of the priest and the teachers, the professors, the mystics, the poets, the artists, all of those things, the goal of those is to keep X, keep the Christ, keep Brahman, keep morals and stuff like that into focus. So it's the job of the head to continue to propagate the idea that any type of decent, good human society is going to take care of, we're going to call it the widows and the children. And that's true in every wisdom tradition. That is a value that is stated. Every religion, or I like wisdom tradition, but every religion, that is stated as a value that you take care of the marginalized, you take care of the poor, you give alms. It's one of the pillars of Islam, so on and so forth. That is the head. So I want you to have that visual. And the head is supposed to be the part of the body that is controlling everything else. Now, I want you to go one level down, which is the shoulders. And the shoulders, we have the kshatriyas. And these are the warrior class and the rulers. Now, this is hugely important for this. This is something I don't want you to miss, because this important piece of information is why our particular country, and I think a lot of other countries, are basically dissolving and disintegrating into clusterfucks, unlike we've never seen before. People are being hurt. People are being ignored. People don't have access to just common things to keep them healthy. So normally the shoulder is reserved for the warrior class and the rulers. And what I'm going to suggest is this. I'm going to suggest that the head is more of the heavenly kingdom that Jesus talked about, and the shoulders is more of the earthly kingdom that Jesus was talking about. And there was a distinction between the two. In American history, there's a distinction between the two, because in American history, we talk about the separation of church and state. This is really important. However, what is important in the separation of church and state is to understand that church is the head and state is the shoulders. Okay, this is really important. And in terms of other cultures and other religions, it might be the temple being the head and the government being the shoulders, or the warrior class. But these are two different worlds, and it's incredibly, incredibly important, because basically healthy societies are distinct to the extent that there is a separation of the spiritual from matter and energy. So there's the governing of matter and energy and citizens and bodies walking around on a certain land doing certain things. There's a certain governing of that. There's a certain need for a warrior class or an authority class to control, to make sure people are doing what they need to do, make sure people don't get hurt. So all of that is supposed to be the shoulder area. But keep in mind that the job of the shoulders is to hold up the head. And the head is supposed to be the church, the temple, the mosques, the holy sites. That's supposed to be the head, and it's supposed to be supported by the shoulders. Now, here is what is incredibly fucked up about 2025, particularly in the country I reside in, which is, of course, the United States of America. In particular, what has happened is that the head has become the government. And that is so clear, because what's happening is we are no longer really taking care of the widows and children. We're not welcoming the stranger. We're not valuing each other. We are out of community. We have the warrior class that is actually taking action against the individuals who are on this land or in this land. It is reversed. It has been reversed. Now, some of this I am somewhat, part of me is still figuring this out, but a part of me wants to say that as much as individuals seem to be blaming President Trump, and as much as individuals seem to be blaming our government and blaming ICE, and yes, all of those things I think you can legitimately be concerned about, and yes, all of those things are certainly anti-Christ, if you want to look at it that way. But let's keep in mind something. Let's keep in mind that in order for the head to lower to the shoulders, the head had to give up its position. And I think that we see this quite a bit. And I want to challenge church leaders, begin to speak up and begin to reclaim your position as the head of society that is supposed to be supported by the government officials. Again, this is where the United States style of government, I mean, I don't know if there's a better form of government or not, but I think the idea was that the government would support the people. The government, the shoulder of the government would support the people, the head, which is really the individuals, the citizenry, the spiritualists, the philosophers, the teachers who are defining what is true, what is moral, so on and so forth, and what is good, and what is moving in the right direction. And unfortunately, the head, in many of these respects, has become so, we've taken on these certain ideals and we've taken on these certain ideologies where we fight for one or two things at the expense of everything else. Well, that makes the head weaker. That's like using just a small part of your brain. And then in terms of our religions, I can tell you that the last several church services that I've gone to, which have been at various churches, I listen to the message and I listen to what's actually being said, and I just kind of leave feeling like, well, that was nice. I mean, that was a nice reminder, but where is the call to social action that religious organizations and wisdom traditions call people toward? Where is the call to, stand up for the people who are being kicked out of our country for no other reason than they wanted to come here and have a better life? And it's like, where is somebody standing up and speaking the truth of, okay, is it possible that a Mexican has brought drugs across the border to the United States? Well, of course it is. That stuff is always going to happen. That's just part of life. But let's not generalize to the point now that every Hispanic person that we cross paths with, we're automatically going to start questioning, are you a drug mule? Are you carrying something across the border? It's like we have to be aware, we have to keep our head, we have to keep our position. And in some ways, that's going to require wisdom traditions and religious organizations to start speaking a stronger truth about what keeps us separate. So the idea is we need to get the professors, the priests, the teachers, the religious leaders, the mystics, the philosophers, the artists, we need to get them back up here, and then we need to put the government down here to support this. But if this is going to give up that power by becoming something benign and something really quite harmless, a lot of churches out there they're just nice little harmless social groups, and they're really not standing for anything and really not, really pushing for social change. And that's problematic because we start putting up with things that get all mixed up. This is the warrior class. The shoulders is supposed to be the warrior class. The warrior class is supposed to be the group of people with the guns, with the tear gas, with the what do you call it? The things that stun guns or whatever, with the batons, with the masks, with the high-powered rifles, wearing their ICE uniforms, that's supposed to be the shoulders. And unfortunately, that has become the head, and I've yet to hear anybody truly speak up and say, we don't have guns in the church. It's not an option. Violence is never an option, period. And if you're going to associate yourself with, and I'm going to speak from the Christian tradition, if you're going to associate yourself with the Christian tradition, then you're not going to have guns. And if you are interested in having guns and you're interested in having that authority, that's fine. There's a place for you. But that's called Kshatriya. That's the warrior class and the ruling class. You're the shoulder. And it gets really confusing when you're trying to be both the head and the shoulder. And this is where this really interesting phrase that's attributed to Christ in the book of Revelation, it's like, choose one or the other. Be hot or cold. Be either hot, cold, cold, hot, however you want to arrange the temperature symbolism there, because the universe has a way of chewing up and spitting out anything that's mixed up. And I really think that that could very well happen to a lot of countries, and I would hate to see that happen here, but sometimes I fear that that's what's going to happen. So let's get back into the story. Sorry, that was a lot of discussion about this model that we're going to refer to. We're going to move more quickly now, but I think that it's a very important point to really focus on, is that we have to decide who we are and what community we want to belong to, and we need to do it well. And that is going to be the difference with an X community, is that you get together with other people and you have certain things in place. And what I am suggesting is that once this baby grows up and starts teaching and modeling life for us and using these parables, I am going to suggest that that will put us back in a place of the head, of actually leading this stuff. And the more we can do this, the more the government will be put in its place, which is more of the shoulders and protecting the rights of the head to do what the head has to do. I hope that makes sense. That sounded like a lot, but I hope that makes sense. So we have King Herod showing up. And King Herod, of course, is supposed to be the shoulders. King Herod was not Roman. He was also not, I don't think he was Jewish even. I think he was appointed by Rome to be king over the Jews. Well, he may have been Palestinian, I'm not sure. And that's a whole other discussion. But the point is that King Herod, who's in charge of this region, which included Bethlehem, which included this manger, which is the space that I am suggesting where all of X, everything is going to incarnate into this manger. King Herod, who was appointed by Rome, is in effect in charge. And remember, he's supposed to be the shoulder holding up the head, not vice versa. We also have the wise men coming in. Now, the wise men are really interesting as well, because the wise men are astrologers, and they see a star in the east that they start to follow, and this star is somehow doing something different. It has somehow garnered their attention. So whether it was a comet, whether it was a couple of the planets lined up, you know that sometimes when the planets line up in our skies, we have a bright spot and everybody, goes outside and looks at it. Well, not everybody, I really don't. But a lot of people get excited about that sort of thing. So these were astrologers. They were also considered perhaps Zoroastrianism. They were probably also considered that particular mystical type individual who looked to the stars for things, So I don't know if that includes zodiac and stuff like that, but the point is I'm trying to build just an appreciation for who these wise men are. So the wise men come from the east, and that would make sense, at least I think, with the rotation of the planet, why they would be continuing to go east, because let's see, where I'm sitting, if you're coming from the east and you're going that way, which happens to be west outside of my window, and you know that if the earth is rotating toward the east, which gives us the illusion that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but then you also have the stars and the moon and stuff that are basically leading you that way due to the opposite rotation of the earth. So see if you can figure that one out. Now these wise men, it took months for them to make this journey, even years to make this journey. So the wise men are not going to show up to see the infant in the manger. The shepherds are, but not the wise men. The wise men are going to come much later, when Jesus is, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years old, but it's going to be much later. What's interesting is this idea of Zoroastrianism or astrology would eventually be adopted by different Muslim groups and would evolve, at least my understanding is evolve into Sufi Muslims. Now, a Sufi Muslim is a subset of Islam. It is a certain uh, type, category, I don't know what you want to say, or a certain branch of Muslim or of Islam that were much more mystical in nature. So the Sufis held much more to this, some of these ideas that I'm presenting, which are more mystical in nature, and maybe we don't understand, but something in us tells us it's true. So Sufis tended to, I think, and again, this is the wisdom tradition or the religion that I know the least about, but Sufis, I believe, are known to be more about love, more about community, more about some of these aspects of acceptance and these mystical experiences than some other Muslims. So it's kind of similar in Christianity, whereas you have Christian mystics who are kind of far and few between, and you have much more structured different religious traditions that you can experience. But they came from the East. They followed his star, they called, and of course the king is troubled. Now, when a king gets troubled, a king is troubled because he hears that the King of the Jews is about to be born, that the Messiah has come into being, and he wants to find out where this Messiah is. And so the king is troubled. And when the king is troubled, when the king is concerned that he's going to have to give up his power, all sorts of shit is going to hit the fan. And what we're going to see is we are going to see this king become so troubled that this king is going to actually send out the warrior class to kill every child 2 years and younger. So that is going to happen at some point. That's how troubled a king will, or excuse me, that's how horrible and vulgar a king will become if the king is concerned about losing his power and being unseated from his throne. Is you will start to see the king do things that are obviously leaning right into evil, putting people in their place, utilizing the warrior class to harm the very citizens, in this case, kill the children. And if you have different opinions about the king, you are going to be either put in your place or removed. You can be removed from the country. You can, I mean, let's just be honest here. There are a lot of parallels going on here that you can't ignore. There's a lot of parallels going on here that I just don't understand how people can ignore it and still be making this argument that kings are somehow of Christ. Okay, kings and Christ are from two different worlds. Kings are the shoulders, the Christ is the head. And it's very important that in a functioning, healthy society, the shoulders support the head, not vice versa. If this becomes the religion, if this becomes the Christ, and it's supporting the government, we have got a very fucked up, dangerous situation, and it's not going to last. The universe doesn't favor that organization when the head flips with the shoulders. So please keep that in mind. I sound like a prophet talking here. The prophecy of John or the prophecy of Jack. I don't know. So, and interestingly enough, that's what's next. So the king sends for the priests and the scribes. So notice who he sends. He sends for the priest and he sends for the scribes, because he wants to unpack this a little bit. He wants to figure out where this baby is being born, because this baby, if this baby is the king, then he's no longer going to be the king. And so he does kind of this political thing where he pretends that he wants to worship, right? He pretends he wants to go pay homage to this newborn king of the Jews, this Messiah, which of course we know all along it's his goal to kill the child so that he can remain in power. So, but notice who he calls. He calls the priests and the scribes. King Herod, the shoulders, calls the priests and the scribes the head of society. That's the way it's supposed to be. Other things that I see here, in verse 5, it uses the word prophet. I want to define a prophet for you. And a prophet is a person, I guess in my mind, a prophet is a person who sees trajectories and patterns. A prophet is not a person that you call up and you say, what are the winning numbers of the lottery? That's not a prophet. That's I don't know what you would call that, fortune teller. That's not what we're talking about here. A prophet is an individual who is in tune with patterns and trajectories of life. That is to say, we've seen this pattern before, here's where it's going to go. This is where we need more prophets to be speaking up in churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, etc., etc. We need more people speaking up and saying, we have seen where this goes and it's not going to end well. When you have religious organizations that are supposed to be the head and they're arming themselves because they live in fear and they are open to violence, we've seen the pattern before. It's not going to end well for the individual or for the group. And we need prophets willing to step up and say, this has to stop. We are not to support certain things, just period. It needs to be clearly delineated, clearly distinguished. So the prophet is the individual who sees the patterns and the trajectories. So this is, as a psychotherapist, in a sense, I am being a prophet when I'm working with a client or a patient. I'm being a prophet in the sense of I'm listening to these stories and I'm looking for these patterns, and then I'm looking at the archetypal trajectories that some of these patterns have taken onto themselves, and so that I'm able to say, hey, I'm really concerned because this is not going to end well for you. Okay? So it's not that I'm telling the future or anything like that. It's that I'm looking at history, I'm looking at science, I'm looking at research, I'm looking at this person's narrative, this person's story, and I'm saying, okay, this is where you're going, and from my experience, this is where you're going to end up, and we need to do something different. So keep that in mind. That's the way I'm going to use the word prophet, because these are individuals who have seen patterns. I don't know if they were experts in history, but they've seen the patterns and they know how things are going to play out. Now, the other term that comes up is shepherd. And in some versions, it says ruler or king, as in governing. So I'm gonna really draw this point, really stress this point once again. When Jesus was born, he was supposed to be the Messiah, and the Messiah is a shoulder. It's a political connotation. It's not a head connotation, it's more of a shoulder connotation that supports something. And when Jesus came as the Messiah, among all of the other hundreds of individuals, well, at least 20 that I could identify, individuals who were also at the time claiming to be the Messiah, the political Messiah, Jesus comes along and I think disappoints a lot of people, because Jesus starts talking about the head, not the shoulders. Jesus starts talking about the head. He was a teacher. He was a priest. He was a rabbi. He was all of these things that are typically associated with the head and not the shoulders. And I think that this disappointed a lot of people. In fact, I could probably argue that this pissed a lot of people off to the point that they crucified him when he said, no, I am the head. I am the X. I am God. I am this aspect of the whole thing. That's who I am. And I think people were quite upset at that. Not only the religious leaders who were going to be dethroned, but also the political leaders who didn't want people to have an identity, didn't want people to feel good about themselves, didn't want people to feel empowered and forgiven and given hope. Because what a great way to control people is to take away their hope. And that is a huge thing that Jesus delivered to people, or will deliver people, because remember, he's still a baby at this point. So a lot of interpretations say he came as a shepherd. There's a distinct difference between a shepherd or a king or a ruler. So at the time of the interpretation, it would make sense to attribute that as like a king or a ruler, whereas in reality, I like the latter interpretations, which is coming as a shepherd. because a shepherd is somebody who guides you. It's a mentor. It's somebody who walks beside you. It's not somebody who shames you and guilts you for not doing things correctly or sinning or however you want to term it. It is an individual who walks beside you and guides you and partners with you, and most importantly, has a relationship with you. Because keep in mind, the king does not usually have relationships with the citizens. We see that very clearly. Our government officials are not having relationships with common people. They have their money, they have their mansions, they have their homes, they're very protected. They don't have the same experiences and the same struggles as a lot of the other people. So it's completely different. It is important to distinguish between a shepherd and a king or a governing ruler. Okay? Shepherd is somebody who is working with you up here. It's working with this part of society. A king or a ruling or a governor is working in the shoulders. There's a distinct difference. So Herod asked the wise men for a timeline. Again, these are experts in the stars, right? They're experts in the seasons and how the tilt of the earth. I don't know to what extent they understood the rotation of the earth or any of that at the time, but they were experts in reading the sky, reading the stars. So Herod asked the wise men for a timeline. And again, we have a typical political lie, which is, I'm going to tell you what you want to hear right now so that I can get the information that I need in order to take the next step. So Herod says, I want to pay homage. I want to pay my respects to this king of the Jews. I want to go see this king of the Jews in person. I want to pay my respects, and this is all good, and I'm excited, and this is what we're going to do, right? Sound like political stump speeches, right? And then all of a sudden, once he gets what he wants, well, then he can actually put into motion his own agenda, which is not going to be good. And how many times have we seen that one play out, where we listen to the political speeches and we feel great and we feel good and we vote in a certain way, and all of a sudden it's like, what happened to the person that I voted for? What's going on there? Well, what happened is you've been lied to, because that's what politicians typically do. A lot of times politicians lie, or they fudge the truth, or they change things, and we are definitely again seeing that in 2025. I don't know that you can come up with another president that we have had that has lied more and has just flat out admitted to not being interested in working with people, not being interested in community. I mean, it's really quite vulgar. And this too is where people have got to start speaking up. So the star overhead, it's a long journey. And now, I have something on verse 10, and I'm drawing a blank on... Oh, I know what it was. I may have to read this really quickly here. Just give me 1 second here. Oh, I got it. Okay, so in verse 10, the wise men find themselves in a spot where the star stops, which just means that as they're traveling day after day, week after week, month after month, it means they have finally arrived where things have synced up. And I don't know to what extent this is Jungian synchronicity, or I don't know why, but for whatever reason, they found themselves in Bethlehem, and the star that they had been following stopped above them, which, if you stop in a certain spot and you look above you, it appears that the stars have stopped because you can't see them moving, right? And so they show up, and then the term that is used is they were overwhelmed with joy, I think is what it says. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. That's the New Revised Standard. And I've got a bunch of others. But here's what I want you to think. We're going to dip into Hinduism again. They were experiencing bliss. So there is a teacher that I absolutely love, and I would encourage all of you, once you're done studying the book of Matthew, I would encourage all of you to look into. And his name is Joseph Campbell. And he has this series that I'm drawing a blank on, and I'm sorry. If I think of it, I'll try and put it in the comments below. But he has this series, and he talks about finding your bliss. And I talk about this with my college students, and I talk about this with my clients. and I use examples from my own life. Like, what is bliss? What is this bliss? Because we're not talking happiness. Happiness to me is very fleeting, and I think that we have been sold a bill of goods when we think that we're supposed to be happy 24/7. And happiness is not the goal. Happiness is going to elude you. There are going to be times when you just can't obtain happiness. You just can't. So happiness is not what we're talking about. We're talking about bliss, and we're talking about joy. And joy is not necessarily happiness. Joy is a bliss. It's a state of feeling like this is what this moment is supposed to be. And I hope you know what I'm talking about. So it's not like this happiness and I'm excited. It's not like that. It's like I'm supposed to be in this space, in this time, at this moment. In a sense, I am experiencing bliss and joy right now. Because when I do these podcasts, I feel alive and I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I feel like things are flowing. I feel like, other than my voice getting scratchy, I feel like I could sit here for hours and keep talking about this kind of stuff. And that is the experience of bliss. I experience it when I'm sitting on my grand piano, just playing. There's this bliss, there's this experience, this joy. And it has kind of an element of just acknowledging that you are where you're at and where you're supposed to be in a given moment. So let me explain it this way, because important concept, I think, for people to consider in this world that is just pounding away that you're supposed to be happy. We're all supposed to be happy. Everybody should be happy. It's like that's just not even realistic, and I don't believe that you would really even want that. But when I am with a client who is either self-harming or suicidal, or clients who have been abused, and they're sharing their story with me, and I am sharing this experience of being in a very dark space with this client or with this patient, I experience a certain type of joy and a certain type of bliss that I'm where I'm supposed to be. That absolutely does not mean that I'm happy about a situation. It doesn't mean that it's bringing me laughter and joy. And I hope you see the subtle distinction there. It's being able to be in a space that is either somber, or it might be dark, or it might be light, or it might include, the more traditional aspects of joy. But it's the idea of you are in a space and you just know that you're supposed to be there in that space, in that moment. That, I believe, was the experience of the wise men when they showed up to the house where Jesus was at. Because remember, by this time, Jesus is at least a toddler, if not 3 or 4 years old. He may have been talking to this at this point. I'm not sure, but probably closer to 2 or 3 years old. I'm not sure of the timeline. But they are experiencing this bliss, this kind of like, oh my God, this is where we are supposed to be at this moment, at this time. This is it. This is where we're supposed to be. And yes, there was probably some happiness, and there was joy, and there was bliss, but there was probably also this somber moment of, we're about to meet this Messiah, So there's all of these different things that are going on here. All right. Now, the wise men bring 3 gifts. This is fascinating to me too. Like, whenever something is included in a story or a narrative, you got to look into it. So I took some time and I reflected on why gold and why frankincense and why myrrh. Like, these are kind of weird things to bring. But so in this narrative, in this story, what do those things represent? And so I did a little bit of research, and I found something just, very fascinating to me. So gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I don't know to what extent these would have been brought to a newborn baby or to a potential Messiah or king. I don't know. All I know is that I found them to be elements that foreshadowed the life of this Jesus. So gold. Gold is attributed with healing, with wisdom, with enlightenment, with power, with purity. So gold is associated with all of that. And that would make sense if they were looking at this infant as a king, why one of the wise men would bring gold. But then it gets kind of interesting because the next thing that they bring is they bring frankincense. And frankincense, incense, so if you've ever gone to a Hindu temple, there's often incense being burned. So it gives it this really nice, kind of this calming smell. Sometimes I burn incense in the house if I want to just have something calm. And if it not for, for having to dust all the time afterwards, I'd probably burn it a lot more. But frankincense is incense. And incense, smoke, it represents worship, it represents prayer, holiness, it represents communion. It represents an interaction between this world and the unseen world, between the earthly kingdom and the heavenly kingdom. There's this idea of smoke, of a scent, of incense. And so this is the second gift. And so it's kind of interesting that we have the birth, which is gold, innocence, purity, holiness. And then we have frankincense, which is communion and worship, and kind of the connection between the physical and then the next world. And then the last thing is myrrh. And myrrh was an interesting one too, because myrrh represents suffering. So myrrh represented suffering, death, humanity, bitterness, to some extent healing. There was even an element that I found that it was used in embalming a dead body. So if you look at gold, frankincense, and myrrh, this is just fascinating to me. So gold, you have purity, kingship, authority, wisdom, enlightenment. And then you have frankincense, which is communion and the interaction between this world and the next. And then you have myrrh, which is suffering and death. Look at the story right there in those three gifts that the wise men brought. And so I don't know, I don't know to what extent, they intentionally chose these things. I don't know. Who knows to what extent they're like, oh, well, let's bring these three things because, this is going to illustrate the life of this messianic baby or whatever. I'm not sure. And then I do have in my notes that the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh were probably given to Jesus when he was about 2 years old. So we're looking at a toddler. And can you imagine Jesus with the terrible twos, especially if you believe like he could do miracles and magic and stuff? What kind of a terrible two child Jesus might have been? It's just fun to think about. So I'm not saying it's true. I'm not trying to be sacrilegious or anything, but I just kind of thought, terrible twos. I wonder what kind of child Jesus was, if he was kind of got into the terrible twos. But anyway. So in chapter 12, once again, we have dreaming that is brought up. Keep in mind that dreaming is always a function of your psyche, of your spirit healing. That's the purpose of dreaming. And it's why we dream. It's why we work through these different symbols that pop up in our dreams. It is your psyche making sense of its experiences on a clinical mental health level, which is why I often do dream work with my clients and my patients, because it can really give insight. And dreaming, of course, takes place during sleep. And we know that when you are asleep, your body is healing at an exponentially faster rate. When your body is in a healthy state of sleep, your body is healing at a much faster pace. So these states where we kind of leave the world and we go somewhere, whether it's to our dreams or whether we get a solid, 7, 8, 9 hours sleep at night, we wake up and it's like, you have no recollection of where you went for those 7, 8, and 9 hours. Did you get unconscious? Who's to say what happened? But the reality is that dreaming is very important. And so this healing consciousness. And Joseph, I believe it was Joseph, has the dream, and this is either his conscience or it's this prophetic side of him that's saying, okay, I know how this pattern is playing out. The wise men have just shown up. Now people know where, I don't know to what extent how all of this worked, but Joseph, once again, is given the impression or follows his gut, or maybe Mary did, and said, we have to get out of here because the wise men are sent by Herod, and that means that Herod is eventually going to be here. And when we get to verse 16, we get to really the ultimate horrific act. It is always a horrific act when the most innocent are killed. And when you get to verse 16, we are talking about the genocide of children. And Herod, of course, uses the warrior class of the day, the shoulders of the day, to go out and to kill all of the children 2 years and younger, in keeping kind of with this timeline that the wise men seem to teach him about. And whenever you have a government, or whenever you have an institution, or you have a warrior class or a class of violence or whatever, whenever that starts turning on its own people, you are not looking at something good. You are looking at something incredibly unhealthy. You are actually witnessing the disintegration of your society when stuff like this happens. It pushed the whole narrative, this act of sending the warrior class into a community to kill the children 2 years and younger, simply because the king was afraid of being thrown off the throne. Okay, whenever you have that, we have got to be very careful. And again, we have got to have the prophets of religious organizations have got to step up, and you have to start drawing attention to the danger and the immorality that we now have warrior classes going into our communities, going into our cities, and they are not targeting, for the most part, they're not targeting threatening individuals. They're targeting individuals who just think different, who may have a different lifestyle, who are marginalized. They are targeting individuals who have really done nothing more than want to come to a place for a better life. And when you start using your warrior class against the individuals who are a part of your land, because we were all strangers in this land once, so it's not like anybody has the right or the decency to be able to say, well, they're illegal. And it's like, I don't give a shit if they're illegal, because we're all here in this time and in this space. This is where we're at. And we have decent human beings who are basically kicking out and saying, you don't belong here. You can't be a part of us. And that is absolutely antichrist. And we need to have more prophets in the church and in temples and in synagogues and in mosques. More people standing up and saying, this is incredibly unacceptable. And yes, that absolutely means pastors, priests, particularly those related to the Christian tradition. That particularly means that you need to stand up in front of your people and you need to say, we are to welcome the stranger. And we have a problem if there's people in amongst us who are thinking that we can just send the stranger away, or are thinking that it's okay to use violence against these strangers. We have got to start being very forthright about non-violence, and we have got to start saying something in our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, and we have to start using the word gun. A gun is nothing less than a symbol of violence, a symbol of control, a symbol of oppression, a symbol of forcing people to do something that they may not be consenting to. I cannot think of anything positive about the symbol of a gun, and it is beyond me why our pastors, priests, in all of the different wisdom religions are not speaking up and saying, this is not going to make it, this is not going to cut it. There are some things that will not be a part of this community. And that includes nationalism, it includes flags, it includes, okay, it's the head is separate than the shoulders. And the more we separate the head from the shoulders in terms of distinguishing the tasks of each, the healthier the whole thing is going to function. All right, and I think that we have to say that, and unfortunately, We have a lot of people who are more concerned about, people leaving and not filling the offering plates. And it's like, that is not the issue. That's not what this is all about. So, genocide of children, when we start turning on the people who are in our land that we were once strangers in, we have to take that really, really seriously. And so I even have a quote here. It says, "Soldiers, step down." And I'll continue to kind of beat this drum. If you are a soldier, if you are a person and you've put yourself in a position of authority where you potentially have to use a weapon to hurt people or kill people, if you've put yourself in a position of authority that you are basically going to have to control people, then that makes you a part of the shoulders. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I want you to do your job well, because we need to have a military class. We need to have a warrior class. We need to have authority figures. But you cannot be a part of both the shoulder and the head simultaneously. It can't work. Because if the head is saying violence is wrong, and the shoulders is saying, well, we may have to use violence, then you're not going to be a good warrior class if there's a part of you saying violence is wrong, and you're not going to be a good person to have in this headspace in terms of protecting people and looking out for the widows and the children and the marginalized and those on the fringe of society if you have it in your head that harming them and shooting them just might be okay. We need to really be, gosh, I can't say it strong enough. We have to, because I'm trying to calm down a little bit. The head has to be the head, and the shoulders have to be the shoulders. And we can't have it any other way. And when we try to combine the two, it's going to fuck the system up, and the system is going to disintegrate, and the system is going to fall. And it is all based on the head continuing in a nonviolent attitude, in an attitude of love, an attitude of forgiveness, an attitude of inclusion, an attitude of healing. All of these things that this baby is going to grow up and demonstrate for us are going to be incredibly important. So, take a sip here. (19 and 20) is the return to Israel. So Jesus returns to Israel with his parents. And then we lose track of about 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 or 7 years. But around the age of 6 or 10, we come to this really kind of cool story where they're in Galilee, and Jesus gets separated from his parents, and he's just a kid at this point. He gets separated from his parents, and they find him in the temple, and he is having a discussion with the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders of the day, the people and the workers of the temple. He's having these discussions, and he is showing this element of wisdom that is beyond his years. And they find him here. Mary and Joseph find him here. And then as the narrative, as the story goes, he says something to the like of, where do you expect me to be? I'm supposed to be in my father's house doing my father's business, or something like that. It was kind of like him. We fast forward, and here he is, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, probably 9 or 10, I think, if he's having these debates. Developmentally, I would think 9 or 10. And he's having these debates and these discussions with these religious leaders, and they are in awe of his ability to perceive and his perspective and things like that. And then age 12, so that's the temple teacher, and that's in the book of Luke. And I apologize, but I am drawing a blank on what I wanted to say there, so I'll have to look that up for another time. So I'm just going to keep going, but maybe it'll come to me and we can skip back there. Age 13 is bar mitzvah. So age 13 is when basically you have the ability to reproduce, and so you go from being a boy to a man. Now, they did not have bar mitzvah in the time of Jesus. This would have come later. But developmentally, we're looking at this child growing up, and we're trying to kind of really look at the human aspect, but also how this child is coming into this archetype of God, this incarnation of God, that we're going to look at and we're going to study. And then something really interesting happens here. Jesus falls off the radar. There is nothing about roughly ages 14 to about 29. There's nothing. Now, I think there are things that we know according to the culture. Like, I know that Joseph was a carpenter, and I know that Jesus was a carpenter. So it would have made sense that in these years, Jesus was probably Joseph's apprentice for a lot of these years. Because a lot of times, it took many, many years for a carpenter or a person with a specific skill to learn the skill, and often they learned it from their father. And so they probably worked together for quite some time while Jesus became a carpenter in his own sense. And then, so that's ages like 14 to mid-20s. Now, I want to take a little bit of a tangent here, and I want to talk about what happens to us, all of us, developmentally from about age 13 to 29. And actually, this happens from birth. When we are born as infants, we come into the world, and Carl Jung would say that we know everything. We know who we are. We don't know who we are, but we are who we are at birth. We come into this world naked, and we are already wired a certain way. We have a certain predisposition. We have all of these things already in place. And scientist friends, you can call it genetics. Philosophical friends, you can call it archetypes from the past. It doesn't matter what you call it, because it's all going to play out. It's all going to play out the same anyway. But we start putting on these ego layers. So if we're uncomfortable in our diaper, or we're hungry, or we need to be moved around a little bit because we get too hot where we're sleeping as infants, if we need our first gods to show up, we extrovert our first prayer, which is crying, which is telling our gods, the adults in our life, because this is where we're learning it, that we need something. We need our diaper change. We need to be comfortable. So we extrovert our first prayer. And then we see what comes back, because that's what extroverts do. Extroverts extrovert themselves onto other individuals, and they see what comes back. That's how they get their energy, their flow of energy. And so this is what infants do. They extrovert themselves, they cry, and they see what comes back, and that will define what kind of existence that they have. And then they get to be toddlers, where they put on more ego layers and more personas. They begin to realize, if I do this, this is going to happen. And what happens developmentally through your mid-20s to early 30s, but I would say in this day and age, I would say certainly by your late 20s, you get to a point where you realize you have had to put on so many ego layers, so many different personas to engage the world, and you start to understand, especially in your 30s, you start to understand that this is just not working for you. That what you're really doing day in and day out is you're putting on ego layers and you're putting on personas, and the goal is simply to interact with the world. And what you're getting back from this exchange is, yes, you might be getting a paycheck, you might have a home, you might have a reliable car, you might have a family, but it's all about putting on these ego layers and these personas. And when we get to our late 20s, early 30s, we're supposed to start feeling like, is this all there is? Is this what I'm going to be doing the rest of my life, is putting on these ego layers and putting on these personas? And then, for this part of life on, the privilege becomes taking off the ego layers and becoming freer, realizing that we can engage the world without putting on all of these different personas, without being chameleon-like and presenting to other people like, I'm this color here and I'm this color here and this is where I'm here, and realizing that we want to bring consistency to our lives. So this is going to come up from a psychological sense through this whole story. And this is kind of the idea of original sin, which is you are born into the world innocent, and as soon as you realize you have to put on ego layers and you have to put on different personas to get what you need, that is what we're going to define as original sin. So there are different interpretations of original sin. Like I suggested, I think it was in episode 2, the original sin was probably Christ incarnating into the space-time continuum. I mean, to take something that big and that beautiful and to trap it by space, time, continuum, matter, energy, that could be considered the original sin. But then the idea of we do this at our births. We birth into the world. We start putting on these personas and these ego layers. And basically, they begin to suffocate us. And that is the idea of sin. And this, too, is where, unfortunately, the Christian church, because I think it's the Christian church that talks most about in terms of sin. And I think I can confidently say that out of all the wisdom traditions, I would have to probably argue that Christianity has produced the most guilt and the most shame in individuals. And a lot of it is because we don't look at this process of putting on these layers to learn how to interact with the world. Yes, those layers are sin. Yes, we do them selfishly. Yes, we do them for our own development and meeting our own needs and our own selfishness and self-will. All of that is absolutely true. But how much more of a beautiful journey it would be for somebody to come up alongside of us as a mentor and say, hey, maybe you can take off some of these ego layers. Maybe you have value no matter what your sin, no matter what ego layers you feel you have to put on, no matter what masks or what persona you need to put on. You have value, you have dignity, you're going to be okay. All you have to do is consent to the process. And that, my friends, is going to be what I'm going to term the good news. And we are going to find that the good news and what I'm going to suggest is going to have absolutely nothing to do with becoming a member of a temple or a synagogue or a mosque. It's going to have nothing to do with going to church. It's going to have nothing to do with becoming experts in the Old Testament and the New Testament or the Bhagavad Gita or the Tao Te Ching. It's going to have nothing to do with that, at least with respect to this particular incarnation of God, who we are calling Jesus, at least as a starting point. It is at age 30 for Jesus, with the research that I did. It was about age 30 that Jesus started to be called rabbi. So age 30, it's rabbi, teacher. At age 30, Jesus identifies as a part of the head of society. But the thing that's going to make this a little bit different is that he is supposed to be Messiah in the shoulders, but he's associating with the head. And not only is he associating with an aspect of the head, he is making the argument and he is presenting as the culmination of everything that is the head, which is science, philosophy, religion, salvation, if you will. So that is where the story is heading. So I think I covered everything. I still have no idea what I meant by temple teacher in the book of Luke, but that's okay because we're trying to let the book of Matthew just kind of stand on its own. That's all I want to cover for today. And email me if you're interested in discussing any of these. You can find my email in the comment section of episode 1. I'll try to remember to put it below, but you can also look up Jack Colley is my alter ego. John Tuttle is my name. So you can look up John Tuttle, psychotherapist, and usually it's pretty easy to find an email to contact me by. And let me just end with this. Here's what I'm considering in my brain for those of you who are watching this, because there's about 40 or 50 of you that are watching these and following these. If you are in the area that I live, I don't want to give too much personal information out here, but if you know me personally or if you want to email me and if you would like to connect, I am throwing around this idea of having like a Wednesday night deal where either I'm doing these X community videos or I'm actually hosting several individuals so that I can have an X community of my own. Because part of my reason for starting this is, yes, I want to kind of cast this vision, but this is also something that I really want. And I am hoping to find a group of people that might be representative of the different religious traditions, maybe different gender, sexual orientations, different socioeconomic. It's like, I would love to be able to show that people from all different backgrounds can get together and be in community and take care of each other and value each other, even though you might not totally agree with each other. It's like, I think what I hope to show is that we can have this intrinsic value that we apply to every human being. And I think that that is what we are going to see modeled for us, is the intrinsic value of every human being, whether it's the person who is collecting the taxes or the prostitute, which are some of the individuals that Jesus forgave, took under his wing, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, yeah, to contact me if you're interested maybe in pursuing something like that. I do have a short list of names that I'm going to be reaching out to as well to see if they're. So namaste, my friends, and I will look forward to our next time together.